Good morning, and welcome back to day 2 of the Humanitarian Leadership Conference. In case you missed yesterday, my name is Dana Dejani. I'm your MC and keynote listener, and I spent last night poring over all the notes from all of the content shared yesterday. And I have a poem in store for you, so make sure that you stay till the closing to hear the reflections at the end of the day. We have a full morning ahead. We have a stellar keynote presentation and a panel discussion, which will be followed by a Q&A. Then we break for tea, concurrent sessions, lunch. Then we do it all over again. We meet back here for a keynote, a panel, a Q&A. We have a break for tea. We go off to the concurrent sessions. And then we come back here for the closing. Are you ready for day 2? Yes. Are you sure? Yes. All right, great. But first, poetry. How does that sound? Good. So this piece is called Origin Story. We've been trained to do such diligent machines, hopped up on speed, of course legally, it's for our ADD. Our focus is sharp now, we move effortlessly, insignificant cogs churned by endless wheels. See, our schools mirror our workplaces, top-down trickle, tasked roles, assigned rituals, never made for you specifically. See, you're a replaceable part in this big industry entity, and they've automated the process well. The work line is seamless. Just insert you, the anima, the deus ex machina, the spark that lights up the shell, and this giant monster comes alive. But let me tell you, it's not so nice. This monster machine destroys everything in sight, insatiable by design, built this way, a bottomless pit. It's impossible to satisfy it. Inefficient, obsolete, it will not stop till there is nothing left. That is the nature of its mythology. Ora, Bora, it slips silently, intent on consuming itself in a slow, sadistic death. We almost delight in it. But there's another story to bring justice to our tragedy. The story of a little girl and then a boy and their parents and friends and neighbors and acquaintances, and soon entire nations said, "No more." And they organized in scores, gathered around shared values, the desire to create harmony, to stop showing up to animate the monster machine. And some even stood bravely in its path. Now those who stayed behind felt burdened as they worked harder to bring the machine to its usual power, and they cursed those who left them as abandoners, deserters. They raged. You see, the machine had become parasitic. It preyed on its host bodies, manipulated the cogs into competition. If I pit the cogs against each other, they'll all cycle harder to get farther. I think I'll call it a human race. And he annexed sections of the machine as stationary and gave some cogs vast mobility. He created a baseless value system and watched his trained fighters go to battle in the arena. Automatic destruction. Self-fulfilling prophecy. The cogs never had a chance until that little girl and that little boy said, "Not me, no more. It's 2025, how are we still talking about war? You adults should grow up. Yeah, read the news. Haven't you learned anything from history? It's not cool. The planet's uninhabitable. How could you let this happen? Look how much we've already lost. Didn't you think it would be a disaster? How many genocides till we get it? It's clear what they were after. Profit. This is unjust. This is unfair. This whole system is broken. But I can fit in there. I have an idea, and I have a dream," and soon they pooled all their wishes into one collective fantasy of a world without the monster machine that drained the earth and demanded all their energy. It was peaceful, this vision, quiet, simple, obvious. A world with hopeful headlines and uplifting news on us. A world where everyone had enough, where everyone was welcomed, all differences celebrated, all singing the same songs. You know, the ones about victory, the ones about joy, the ones about the brave little girl and boy who believed in something good and stood for that vision, naive and noble and fearless and persistent, who shouted with passion, "Enough, no more. We won't man this machine down its deadly course. We refuse to fight. We won't participate in your wars. We give up the desire to always want more. We're happy if everyone has what they need." Yeah. And they agreed to listen to each other and honor the pain of those gone, the bloodshed and tear shed, the guilt and the blame. And the cogs met and shared stories of their love and their pain. And they began to create new identities and even new names in this new context, no longer part of the machine. At first, they were a bit lost, but then they began to recognize each other and recognize themselves, and the human species remembered how it felt to be connected in the organic networks weaved within communities. And bit by bit, we achieved that tremendous fantasy, because eventually the machine died off. When the final cog gave up the past, it was starved of human energy. And when the last smokestack blew, and when the last prisoner was freed, and when the last piece of plastic was removed from the seas, and when the last refugee returned home, when the last dollar was burned, when the last bomb was dismantled, when the last coal was burned, we finally knew peace. We became at last human beings. Now on to the first speech of the day. Truly, I'm delighted to introduce a man who knows just how important it is to patron our youth, how much they will set the tone for our future. Matt Tinkler, CEO of Save the Children Australia and chair of the CHL board. Matt Tinkler has helped lead Save the Children in various executive roles for 8 years before becoming CEO in 2022. He's a deep policy thinker and a fierce advocate of children. He has transformed Save the Children Australia's approach to delivering international programs and ensuring the organization has a strong public voice for vulnerable children through media, advocacy, and campaigns work. With a background in corporate and public law, Matt worked as Chief of Staff to the Honorary Bill Shorten MP in the federal government and oversaw a diverse range of portfolios, including charity and non-for-profit regulation. Please join me in welcoming Matt Tinkler to the stage.
Thank you, Dana. Can I just say what an extraordinary job you are doing as our MC. We are very lucky to have you, and I want you at all our conferences, I got to say. The ability to combine the creative and the moderation and the agenda management is second to none I've seen, so thank you so much for your support. Salam alaikum, good morning. Woman Jerka, everyone. Woman Jerka is a term used by the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, the traditional owners of the lands in Victoria and Melbourne, where I am from and where the Centre for Humanitarian Leadership is based. And I want to acknowledge the rights of all First Nations people around the world and support their right to self-determination as a key part of our humanitarian intent. I'll be brief this morning, but I do want to relate to you 3 quick leadership stories. And Simon Sinek, the leadership coach, has said that music is the sound that happens between the notes, and the magic at meetings or conferences is often the connection that happens between the meeting, between the agenda items. And I've had 2 extraordinary connections on the bus ride to and from the hotel. The first last night with Joan from the Rella Women's Foundation. There she is. Hi, Joan. A Ugandan woman leading a GLBTIQ rights organisation in a country where the environment is absolutely hostile to those rights. Did you know she's been arrested a bunch of times for the work she does and who she is as a person? I was just so inspired by your story, Joan, and reminded that we have extraordinary leaders in this room fighting the fight for human rights every day. And then Omar, on the way this morning, a Syrian man living in the UK, but contemplating the extraordinary task of relocating his family back to Syria to literally start the rebuilding process for his country. And we were talking about the extraordinary nature of that task, just building a government, a ministry, civil society, service delivery. It is huge, but I was so inspired by that conversation, Omar, and we're lucky to have you in this room as well. It reminded me of the origin story for Save the Children, and I relayed this to Joan last night, and many people don't know that Save the Children was founded by an extraordinary woman. Her name was Eglantine Jebb. And sometimes we talk about living in unprecedented times, but she was living in 1919, a time before women had the right to vote, at the end of the so-called First Great War, World War I. She did something extraordinary at the time. She took herself off behind enemy lines in Allied blockaded Eastern Europe. She collected stories and images of children who were starving as a result of the Allied blockade. She went back to London and published photos and stories in the papers, handed out leaflets in Trafalgar Square. She got prosecuted under what was called the Defence of the Realm Act for the unauthorised publication of information gathered behind enemy lines. So for standing up for children and their rights, before children had rights, she was prosecuted. But the interesting part of the story then was the Crown prosecutor, who was acting against her for the Crown, the government, was so moved by her plight that when she was convicted of the crime, he paid the fine on her behalf. And that fine effectively became the first donation to Save the Children. And Eglantine Jebb and her sister Dorothy Buxton went on to raise £400,000 in 1919 to feed the so-called enemy's children at the time. This was a time before children and rights was a concept. Children were considered the property of adults. They worked in mines, they worked in factories, they worked in chimneys. They were to be seen and not heard. And this woman fought for their rights. She went on to pen the Geneva Declaration, which was the first time anyone had written down the concept that children have inalienable rights by virtue of being born humans. Now, those principles went on to form the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the most ratified convention in the history of the world. So this inspiring woman, in a time when women didn't have the right to vote, in 1919, had the vision and the courage and the leadership to create a concept around child rights, to form what has become the world's largest independent child rights organisation, operating in 115 countries around the world today. What extraordinary vision and leadership at a time when the world was grappling with war and these concepts were just ideas and didn't exist. So in Save the Children, we have a tendency to ask ourselves when we're not sure or we're trying to make a difficult choice, what would Eglantine do? What would Eglantine Jebb do in this moment? And I really want to throw that challenge back to you today, inspired by the leadership stories of the amazing people we have in the room. People like Eglantine Jebb, who came before us more than 100 years ago, but whose work has inspired a global child rights concept and movement. As we're thinking about our agenda today, and the times perhaps are not dissimilar to 1919 that we face at the moment, what would Eglantine Jebb do in this moment? What would you do as a leader if faced with the kind of choices she was faced with? And how are we going to take that momentum forward after these conversations today? Make sure that you find the time to connect with your colleagues in the music between the notes, the time between the meetings today. It's super important, and I think the best part of being in a gathering like this. And on behalf of the Centre for Humanitarian Leadership, I want to say thank you for your trust in us and your attendance at the event. Thank you to Mariana and the team for all the extraordinary work in pulling it together. And best of luck with the conversations today. Thank you.
All right, up next, we are so pleased to have with us Hibak Kalfan, Executive Director of NEAR, who will be launching the first keynote presentation of the day. As Executive Director at NEAR, Hibak collaborates with local and national actors through the Global South to promote equity among humanitarian and development stakeholders with a focus on supporting local communities. She holds an MA in Development Policy and Practice from the University of New Hampshire's Carsey Institute. Hibak has over 20 years of experience in international development, having worked in the US, Africa, and the Middle East. Her diverse career includes roles in local NGOs, international NGOs, multilateral organizations, and currently a Global South network. Her expertise spans various sectors, including localization, humanitarian aid, democracy and governance, media development, advocacy, public relations, and more. Let's warmly welcome Hibak Kalfan to the stage.
Good morning, everybody. I wrote an entire speech, and then I heard Mariana yesterday, and then tried to write talking points. I wanted to start off by saying a bit of my reflection yesterday. It was amazing to see a room so diverse, with diverse voices and diverse leadership. I can say in a majority of the conferences that I go to, this is definitely not the diversity that I see. But there was an interesting yet uncomfortable kind of conversation that happened yesterday. On one side, there was a few people who were talking about the system and how they want to see the system continue. And then on the other side, there were others that I heard that were really amazing who started thinking about the future. Comments like Tamris, when she was talking about the future really being about uplifting the national kind of local ecosystems. I really appreciated that because I do believe that that's the future of humanitarian aid. When I was flying here and I started writing up the speech that I wasn't supposed to write up, I felt some unease. I felt real unease coming to this conference, another one with international kind of folks from 80 plus countries, really being able to discuss transformation around leadership in times of polycrisis. And I just realized, kind of flying over, that we were a short distance away from the most horrific genocide of our lifetime. And I teared up because I realized that I'm sure all of you who have social media saw the video this past weekend of Rifat Redouan's last moments of his life. And it made me realize that we're all here with positive intent, but there's so much that's broken in this world today. There's so much broken within the sector that we work in. And it's not just heartbreaking, but it reveals how broken our systems really are. It made me question, who does this system protect? And really, who does this system abandon? It also made me try and reconcile how a world so interconnected with, some people think it's negative, but globalization, and from a positive perspective, the increase of use of social media, how we can be in one country and one community and not only feel their joy, but feel their pain. But it also kind of made me question this, the possibility of a genocide in Gaza, or drone attacks in Yemen, or the shooting of emergency response workers in Myanmar, and then ultimately the absolute abandonment of Sudan. In the last 18 months, I've had a couple of conversations in the last kind of 24 hours, and I heard from a lot of people the term burnout and the fact that a lot of us are exhausted physically and mentally. And for me, I think it's because of the last couple of years that we've seen this compiling of crisis, compiling of kind of issues that we're going through. And then most recently, we're seeing the US government kind of the funding freeze and the halt to our entire sector. We've seen leaders cut their aid budgets and shift it towards militarization, whether it's a left-leaning liberal government or a right-leaning conservative government. It doesn't matter. We see 20 to 90% of budgets of ODA being cut. And then last week, actually it was last night, I think it came into effect, the beginning of a tariff war that I don't know if any of us have really thought, what does that mean for the humanitarian sector? It's going to be terrifying when we think about the logistics and the amount of money that crosses borders, that we're going to be able to support each other, the NFIs, the food, all of the different things that we invest in. What does that look like with a tariff war? In the last decade or so, and I'm sure it's going to continue to be said in this conference, we hear local and national organizations or local and national leaders are there before, during, and after a crisis. It's become a throwaway term. I hear it in almost every meeting, but it's not a throwaway term. It's actually the reality, because who's responding in Gaza? It's institutions, Palestinian institutions, the Palestinian NGO network. Who's responding in Myanmar? There are people in this room who are supporting Asia local leaders from Indonesia and Nepal who are supporting our Myanmar brothers and sisters for how to respond in this emergency response. We have seen that our members in Colombia and Venezuela are trying to figure out how to work together around the migration crisis. For us, I mean, the biggest kind of lesson in this chaos is that solidarity is key. The foundation for us to be able to move forward as a community is through solidarity. For our journey as NEAR, the network that I represent, along with, I think, 15 people in this room that are members of NEAR, we've felt this solidarity from Somalia to Pakistan, from Philippines to Guatemala. But the ignition point happened for us the first 2 weeks of October. The NEAR Secretariat was actually here in Doha. And as we all know what happened on October 7th and the following days, we started grappling with that conversation. And our regional representative from Latin America and Caribbean got a text message from our members in El Salvador and Guatemala saying, what are we going to say? How are we going to support our brothers and sisters in Gaza? And so we came up with the statement, but after that statement, we started asking each other, what does solidarity mean beyond a statement? So we started creating this concept called localization labs, which you'll hear from our Asia localization lab today, this afternoon. And for us, it was this creation of a safe space. It started in 7 countries, but it was so important that now I can happily say that it's in 2 regions and 14 countries across the global south. The labs, as I say, is not a project or just meetings. It was really a way for us to change our ways of working. I also learned that when we talk about solutions aren't just in one ecosystem. They're in every ecosystem. So in those 16 labs, we found out that there were 80 financial and non-financial solutions that were already created to help with the humanitarian system. It confirmed what we already knew. It confirmed that innovation and capacity were never an issue for local actors. The actual issue is access and recognition. And someone yesterday said, we need the international community at the beginning of a crisis. And I'm not saying we don't, but I think we need to question it. I think we need to question the added value of all organizations that are there to respond for a humanitarian response. To get back to Tamrice's point that I'm probably going to say over and over again, because I really do believe it's the future of humanitarian action, especially if we think about it from a sustainability perspective. If we really want to ensure that we're able to respond to crises and shocks, especially in an environment of polycrisis, we have to build our national and local ecosystems. And the sector should be supporting those national and local ecosystems, not trying to overcome them or destroy them. And so when I think about the term solidarity, I don't mean it from a sentiment perspective. I mean it from a structural perspective. I mean the relationships, financing pathways, and governance models that allow our communities to lead their own response. So I'm going to try and go from a sombering kind of beginning to now trying to think about what are some elements that we need to discuss or that we need to think about in a future aid system. Number one is this concept of grounding it in already existing local solutions and diverse leadership. which exists in this room, shaped by people who live with the consequences of failure. I don't know if we realize how much local and national actors, as community members, are continuously failed by this system. We need to build an expansive southern network, and we heard from Sisara yesterday, the great example in ADPC, how there's work that needs to be done not only by civil society, but by the private sector, by government, by academia. And those are the groups that we need to bring together to consider what this new system should look like. We need to build direct and trusted relationships. Philanthropy mentioned that yesterday. There's this concept in the grand bargain, which I think for the last 10 years folks have been arguing about, and it's this 25% marker for localization. But the argument has been around the complexity of the definition of a local actor, the complexity of how many transactions should it take to get resources to a local actor. For me, it's really clear. It's direct. If it's not direct, it should be a maximum of one intermediary. And that one intermediary should add value, and that should be the norm, not the exception. I was at a meeting a couple of months ago, and a former head of an international NGO stood up in front of, I think it was 10 heads of development corporation institutions. And he told us a story about how when he looked into the finances of his organization, he found several examples of the cost of getting money to local actors or a community took 9 financial transactions. And then he went through the 9 transactions. And to be honest, it shocked me. He said, we get resources from a community member, a donation, an individual donor. It comes to our organization. We send the money to the United Nations. The United Nations sends it back to an INGO. An INGO sends it to their country office. A country office sends it to a local actor. And then a local actor implements the funding. How much does that cost? So we're talking about money becoming less and less and less, but then we're not thinking about the efficiency of how we spend that money. The third is a topic that I don't know that has been discussed, which is this concept of transformation anchored in economic justice. I've been having these wonderful conversations with economists to try and figure out kind of what do we do in these shrinking resources. And there were a couple of stories that came out that shocked me again. And the first story was, it comes from the book Dead Aid, which I'm sure many of you have read, which is this concept that for every dollar that aid gives in Africa, $4 is extracted. That's absolutely ridiculous. It was also a discussion in France when they were talking about the reshaping of a financial architecture system, where the president of Kenya mentioned for every dollar of revenue that they receive, 70 cents goes to debt collection. How do you expect them to build a social system or a social sector when their arms are tied behind their backs and their legs are tied? It's impossible. Then we even talked about the cost of debt, how the cost of debt was increasing at a faster rate than the ability to mobilize direct resources or domestic resources. With all of these different challenges, it's not something we necessarily think through. Yes, this is a humanitarian audience, but none of us are outside the web of the broader web of the aid architecture. So where do we begin to see change? For us, we've already been thinking about self-reliance. I think from the inception of NEAR and the discussions we have with our members and the shocks that we've absorbed over and over and over again with the resource cuts. So we've been talking about impact investing. That's where even this morning I was talking to somebody and they were telling me that the farms that they're a part of has a return of 28% per year. These are the types of things that we should be considering. Local philanthropy is something that many in this room are a part of. And then even Bashair yesterday talked about a bit about diaspora engagement. $2 billion of diaspora remittances goes into Somalia every year. That's more than the humanitarian sector provides in Somalia. I know these topics kind of are being discussed in more detail. And I want to say I definitely don't have all the answers. I think we're all moving towards some of these answers, which is a positive trajectory versus kind of thinking insular and being able to say, kind of, how do we keep our offices necessarily open in Washington or London, but really how do we respond to some of these crises that exist in some of the countries that I mentioned. I kind of want to end my kind of keynote with a personal story that I told Mariana over WhatsApp a couple of months ago. This is the moment that we're in right now. It's hard, but it's not impossible. It can be transformed, but it'll require tough decisions and courage amongst all of us. In 2018, I joined NEAR as a consultant. And when I joined NEAR as a consultant, I spent 6 months kind of thinking about operations, cost effectiveness, kind of the direction that we were moving in. And 6 months later, they made me the executive director. And when I became the executive director, one of the first decisions I made was we would never, ever, ever take bilateral funding ever again. Because the hoops we had to kind of jump through to get bilateral funding were so difficult. And the commitment to shift power and resources from those same donors was so low that how would I advocate to these same donors to ask them to change? It was a really difficult time because we had 10 people on the team. We had to let go of the entire team, even cancel my contract at that point. And 2 founders and myself then decided to become volunteers for the next 6 to 8 months, just to keep NEAR afloat, because it was a network that some knew, some didn't know, and a lot didn't like. And so we wanted to make sure that the mission moved forward. And then about 8 months, a trusted partner actually in this room gave us a multi-year grant for $250,000. And that $250,000 revived our network. It revived our network to get to a point now where we have 300 members across 42 countries. We work with 21 national and local networks that exist that are more than thousands and thousands of organizations and local leaders. We have a staff of 21. We built financial mechanisms that were able to support our members with millions and millions of dollars for emergency response. We were able to, just during the USAID funding freeze, fund 30 of our members with a $25,000 gift to be able to ensure that they could keep their lights on and their offices open. We were able to advocate, or we're still able to advocate alongside our members and partners at the local, national, regional, and global levels. We've also been able to do a little bit of learning and experimenting with AI, something that I'm very confused about, but I'm sure there are experts in the room. And then most importantly, we've been able to create a community of wonderful leaders that trust each other, that support each other, which is really interesting, regardless of language, regardless of the fact if they have a financial well-being or not, regardless of their religion, regardless of their political interest or any other social or political divider. We've been able to build an intentional community with the foundation of global solidarity. And that's the future we're trying to build, not just for NEAR, but for this sector and for the world at large. Thank you very much.